The wind howled like an angry beast as it swept across the empty parking lot of Bell's Auto Repair. Thomas Bell wiped his calloused hands on a shop rag and glanced out the foggy window at the thickening snow. The weather report had warned about this storm, but nobody expected it to hit this hard or this fast. "Guess that's it for today," Thomas muttered to himself, turning off the main shop lights. At 42, he had spent more than half his life fixing cars in this small town of Pinewood. The garage had been his father's before him, and Thomas took pride in keeping the family business alive, even when times got tough. He was just about to lock up when his eyes caught something through the swirling snow. The faint red glow of brake lights, then a flash of headlights spinning wildly before disappearing down the embankment across from his shop. Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his heavy work coat and a flashlight, then pushed against the door as the wind tried to keep him inside. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath for a moment before he leaned forward and trudged through the rapidly accumulating snow. "Hello? Anybody there?" he called out, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the blizzard. The snow was already 6 inches deep and falling fast, making each step a challenge. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and Thomas could feel the sting on his exposed face as he moved toward where he'd seen the lights. As he neared the edge of the road, his flashlight beam caught the reflection of a bumper. A mid-sized blue SUV had slid off the road and was tilted at an awkward angle, its front end buried in a snowdrift. The back wheels hung partially off the ground, making it impossible for the vehicle to drive out on its own. Thomas skidded down the small embankment, nearly losing his footing. When he reached the driver's side, he saw a woman frantically trying to start the engine, which only responded with a sputtering cough before dying again. He knocked on the window, causing the woman to jump. Her eyes were wide with fear until she registered Thomas standing there in his work uniform, the name of the auto shop visible on his jacket. She rolled down the window just a crack. "Car won't start," she said, her voice shaking from either cold or fear. "Probably both. We hit a patch of ice and everything just... we spun out." "We?" Thomas asked, peering past her into the back seat. That's when he noticed 2 small children huddled together under a thin blanket. A little boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, and a girl who looked around 7 or 8. Both kids stared back at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm Thomas Bell. My shop is just up there," he said, pointing back toward the garage. "Engine's probably flooded and you're stuck good here. This storm's only getting worse. You folks need to get somewhere warm." The woman glanced at her children, then back at Thomas. He could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing the danger of the cold against the risk of trusting a stranger. "I'm Diane," she finally said. "These are my kids, Joey and Lily." "Nice to meet you all, though I wish it was under better circumstances," Thomas replied with a gentle smile. "Look, my shop is warm and I've got a phone you can use. Cell service is probably already down with this storm." A particularly fierce gust rocked the SUV, making the decision for them. Diane nodded, then turned to her children. "Okay, we're going to go with Mr. Bell to his garage until help can come." Getting everyone up the slippery embankment proved challenging. Thomas carried Joey, who clung to his neck with surprising strength for such a small child. Diane managed Lily, though Thomas had to reach back several times to steady them. The wind cut through their clothes, and by the time they reached the garage, all 4 were covered in snow, their fingers and faces numb with cold. Thomas ushered them inside, quickly locking the door against the howling storm. The garage wasn't fancy, but the large space heaters made it significantly warmer than outside. The familiar smells of oil, rubber, and coffee filled the air. "Let's get you folks warmed up," Thomas said, leading them through the garage to a small break room in the back. It wasn't much, just a mini fridge, microwave, coffee maker, and a worn couch where Thomas sometimes napped during long work days. He turned up the heat and pulled some clean shop towels from a drawer. "Here," he said, handing them to Diane. "Not exactly luxury, but they're clean. Get the kids dried off while I make some hot chocolate." Joey, the little boy, watched Thomas's every move with curious eyes as the mechanic filled a kettle and set it to boil on the small hot plate he kept for making tea. "You fix cars?" Joey asked, his earlier fear giving way to curiosity. Thomas nodded. "Sure do. Just like my daddy did and his daddy before him." "Our car broke," Lily said matter-of-factly, her teeth still chattering slightly despite the warming room. "Well, we'll take a look at it when this storm lets up," Thomas promised. Right now we need to make sure you all are safe and warm." Diane had been quiet, methodically drying her children's hair and hands with the shop towels. Now she looked up at Thomas, her expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering wariness. "Thank you for helping us. We were heading to my brother's place in Millfield when the storm hit. I thought we could make it before the worst came through." Thomas shook his head as he prepared the hot chocolate. "Weather around here can change in a heartbeat, especially in winter. Forecasts are just guesses half the time." He handed steaming mugs to everyone, giving the children slightly cooler versions with extra marshmallows he kept for his nieces and nephews when they visited. "I tried to call my brother, but there's no signal," Diane said, checking her phone again. "Phone lines are probably down already. I've got a landline in the office we can try," Thomas offered, "though I wouldn't count on it working either in this weather." As if to confirm his words, the lights flickered ominously. Thomas frowned and moved to a cabinet, pulling out an emergency lantern and setting it on the table. "Just in case," he explained. Joey's small hand reached out to touch one of the many framed photos on the wall. Pictures of Thomas with various cars, some with trophies, others with proud customers. "Is that you?" Joey asked, pointing at a younger version of Thomas standing next to a restored classic car. Thomas nodded, smiling at the memory. "That was my first solo restoration project. A said Chevy Impala. Took me almost 2 years to get her running again." "Why?" Lily asked, warming her hands around her mug. "Because sometimes the best things take time and patience," Thomas explained. "That car came to me as just a shell of rusted metal. Most folks would have scrapped it. But I saw what it could be." Diane watched the interaction, visibly relaxing as Thomas talked to her children. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the windows of the old garage building. A particularly loud gust made Joey jump, spilling a little of his hot chocolate. "It's okay, buddy," Thomas said quickly, grabbing a rag to clean up the small spill. "Just the wind talking. This old building has weathered worse storms than this. How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" Diane asked, glancing anxiously at the window where snow was now piling up against the glass. Thomas considered for a moment. Weather reports said the storm might last through the night. "Roads won't be cleared until morning at the earliest." He hesitated, then added, "I've got a small apartment upstairs. Nothing fancy, but there's heat, food, and a couple of spare beds. You and the kids would be more comfortable there than down here." He could see the moment of hesitation cross Diane's face again. Thomas understood. A single mom with 2 young kids stranded with a stranger during a blizzard. He'd be cautious too. "I can stay down here in the shop," he added quickly. "Give you folks your privacy." "No," Joey protested immediately. "You have to tell us more car stories." Thomas couldn't help but laugh at the boy's earnest expression. "Well, I've got plenty of those." Diane's face softened into a genuine smile for the first time since they'd met. "We'd appreciate a warm place to wait out the storm. And honestly, some company wouldn't be bad either. It's been a long drive already." As Thomas led them upstairs to his modest apartment, he realized it had been a long time since he'd had guests. The place wasn't much. A small living room with a worn but comfortable couch, a basic kitchen, 1 bedroom and a bathroom. But it was clean and warm, and right now, that was what mattered. "I can make us some real food," Thomas offered. "Got some soup and sandwiches. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." "We can help," Lily volunteered, already looking more comfortable. "I'm good at making sandwiches. Mom says I'm the best sandwich maker in 3 counties. "Is that right?" Thomas asked with a grin. "Well then, I'd be honored to have your expertise." As they worked together in the small kitchen, the howling of the wind outside seemed less threatening. The unexpected guests brought life to Thomas's quiet apartment, filling it with chatter and questions and small laughs. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the lonely echo of the place was gone, replaced by something warmer. The blizzard that had brought danger had also, quite unexpectedly, brought something else entirely. None of them could have guessed how this chance encounter would change everything in the days to come. Morning arrived with a blinding whiteness that poured through the apartment windows. Thomas woke on his couch, stiff but rested, the events of the previous night rushing back as he heard small footsteps padding across the floor. "It stopped snowing, mister," Joey announced, his face pressed against the window. "Everything's white!" Thomas sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The apartment smelled of coffee. Diane must have found his old coffee maker. He folded the blanket he'd used and followed the excited boy to the window. The world outside had transformed overnight. At least 2 feet of snow blanketed everything in sight. The road was completely buried, with only the very tops of road signs peeking through the white expanse. Thomas's tow truck was nothing but a snow-covered lump in the parking lot. "Morning," Diane said, appearing from the kitchen with a steaming mug. "Hope you don't mind, I found the coffee and figured you might need it." "Mind? That's the best thing I could wake up to," Thomas said, gratefully accepting the cup. "How'd you folks sleep?" "Better than I expected," Diane admitted. The kids crashed hard after all the excitement. She joined them at the window, her expression growing concerned as she took in the winter landscape. "We're really snowed in, aren't we?" Thomas nodded, taking a careful sip of the hot coffee. "Looks that way. Plows won't get to these back roads until they clear the main highways. Could be a day, maybe 2. Lily appeared from the bedroom, her hair tousled from sleep. "Can we build a snowman?" she asked immediately upon seeing the snow. Diane and Thomas exchanged a look that contained equal parts amusement and worry. "Let's have breakfast first," Diane suggested. "Then we can figure out our next steps." Thomas's kitchen wasn't stocked for guests, but he had enough eggs, bread, and bacon to make a decent breakfast. The 4 of them worked together, with the children setting the small table while the adults cooked. The domesticity of it felt strange to Thomas. His apartment hadn't seen this kind of activity in years. As they ate, Thomas tried the landline phone again. To his surprise, it had a dial tone. "Good news," he announced. "Phone's working. You can call your brother now." Relief washed over Diane's face. She quickly dialed the number while Thomas kept the children entertained, showing Joey how to make a paper airplane from an old newspaper. The relief was short-lived. Diane returned to the table looking worried again. "My brother's snowed in too. The roads to Millfield are completely closed. A truck jackknifed on the highway and they can't even get plows through." She sat down heavily. "He says it might be 3 days before things clear up enough for travel." 3 days? Lily echoed, her eyes wide. Thomas considered their situation. "Well, I've got food enough for a couple days at least. Might have to get creative toward the end, but we won't go hungry." He looked at Diane. "You're welcome to stay here until the road's clear. Not much choice anyway." "We can't impose on you like that," Diane protested. "It's no imposition," Thomas said firmly. "Can't exactly turn you out in this, can I? Besides," he added with a smile toward the kids, "I haven't had this much company in a long time. It's nice." Joey, who had been quietly folding his own airplane, looked up. "Can we see your garage again? Do you have cool tools?" "Joey," Diane began, "Mr. Bell probably has work to do." "Actually," Thomas interrupted, "I'd be happy to show you around properly. Shop's closed today anyway, nobody's driving in this mess." He glanced at Diane. "That is, if it's okay with your mom." After breakfast, they bundled up and made their way downstairs to the garage. Without customers or the usual workday noise, the place had a peaceful quality. Thomas flipped on the lights, illuminating the clean, organized workspace. "Wow," Joey breathed, taking in the tool chests, hydraulic lifts, and the partially restored classic car in the corner. Thomas spent the next hour giving them a tour, explaining different tools and how they worked. He let Joey and Lily sit in the driver's seat of the old Mustang he was restoring, pretending to drive while making engine noises. Diane watched, leaning against a workbench. "You're good with them," she observed quietly when the children were distracted by a collection of license plates Thomas had mounted on one wall. Thomas shrugged. "Kids are easy. They're just honest about what they're thinking." "Unlike adults?" Diane asked with a raised eyebrow. "Sometimes," Thomas acknowledged. "Been on my own a long time." Gets quiet. "This is nice." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the children explore. "What brought you through Pinewood anyway?" Thomas finally asked. "Not exactly on the main highway," Diane sighed. "GPS suggested it as a shortcut. I should have stuck to the main roads, but we were already running late." She twisted her wedding ring, a simple gold band. "We're moving in with my brother for a while." "Fresh start?" Thomas nodded, recognizing there was more to the story but not wanting to pry. "Fresh starts can be good." "That's what I'm hoping," she said quietly. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud banging on the garage's front door. Thomas crossed the shop floor and peered through the glass to see Mike Reynolds, the owner of the local diner, bundled up against the cold. "Thomas, you okay in there?" Mike called through the door. Thomas unlocked it. Letting in a blast of cold air along with Mike, who stomped snow from his boots. Checking on folks along Main Street, Mike explained, rubbing his gloved hands together. Power's out in half the town. Got my generator running at the diner, offering hot food to anyone who can make it there. He noticed Diane and the children. Oh, you've got company. They got stranded in the storm last night, Thomas explained. Their car went off the road across from the shop. Mike nodded understandingly. Lucky they found you. He turned to Diane. Ma'am, your family's welcome at the diner too if you can make the walk. About 6 blocks down. We're okay here for now, Diane said. But thank you. After Mike left, Thomas looked thoughtful. Town pulls together in weather like this, he explained. Should check on old Mrs. Peterson, though. She lives alone 2 buildings down. Might need help. We can all go, Diane suggested. The kids would probably love to play in the snow for a bit. Getting ready for the snow was an adventure itself. Thomas found some old winter clothes that might work. A pair of his late mother's boots for Diane, though slightly too large, and some of his own hats and gloves for the children. Comically oversized but functional. The street outside was pristine and untouched, the snow nearly up to Joey's waist. Thomas lifted the boy onto his shoulders while Diane held Lily's hand as they carved a path through the deep snow. Old Mrs. Peterson was indeed grateful for the visit. She had heat but needed help bringing in more firewood for her stove. While Thomas stacked logs, the children charmed the elderly woman with their stories, and Diane helped make tea in the kitchen. As they left, Mrs. Peterson pressed a container into Diane's hands. Cookies I baked yesterday, she insisted. For those beautiful children. Their walk back turned into an impromptu snow day celebration. Joey and Lily convinced Thomas to help them build not just one snowman, but an entire snow family. Thomas showed them how to make perfect snowballs, which led to a snowball fight that left everyone breathless and laughing. Diane, who had been hesitant at first, proved to have remarkable aim, pelting Thomas squarely in the back of the head with a well-packed snowball. Sorry, she called out, not looking sorry at all. Thomas grinned, wiping snow from his neck. Oh, it's like that, is it? He scooped up more snow, and soon they were all darting behind cars and snowbanks, shrieking with laughter. By the time they returned to the garage, their cheeks were rosy and their clothes were damp with melted snow. Thomas cranked up the heat and made hot chocolate while everyone changed into dry clothes. Later, as afternoon faded into evening, Thomas taught the children how to play checkers on an old set he kept in a drawer. Diane sat nearby, watching the easy way Thomas interacted with her children, his patience as he explained the rules, his genuine delight when they made good moves. Can you tell us a story? Lily asked as Thomas put the checkers away. About fixing cars? Thomas considered, settling into his armchair. Did I ever tell you about the time I had to fix a car for a movie star who broke down right outside this very garage? The children's eyes widened as they shook their heads. Well, Thomas began, his deep voice filling the cozy apartment. It was about 10 years ago during another snowstorm, though not as bad as this one. As Thomas spun his tale, embellishing just enough to make the children giggle, Diane watched him, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time in months, she felt the keen. Out of anxiety in her chest loosened slightly. They were stranded, yes, but somehow they had found themselves in exactly the right place. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, adding fresh powder to the already blanketed world. The wind had died down, leaving behind a hushed, peaceful quiet that seemed to wrap around the garage like a blanket. For tonight at least they were safe, warm, and in unexpectedly good company, what none of them could have guessed was how the next day would test their newfound friendship in ways they couldn't imagine. The second day of being snowed in began with the distant rumble of snowplows. Thomas was already up, standing by the window with a mug of coffee when Joey joined him, still in his borrowed pajamas. Are they coming to save us? The boy asked, pressing his face against the cold glass. Thomas chuckled. Not exactly saving us, but they're clearing the main roads. That's a good start. He ruffled Joey's hair. Sleep okay, buddy? Joey nodded. Lily kicked me twice, he reported solemnly. Siblings do that sometimes, Thomas said. I had a brother who used to snore so loud I thought the roof would come down. You have a brother? Joey asked, suddenly interested. Had, Thomas corrected gently. He passed away a few years back. He didn't add that his brother had died overseas in military service. Some details weren't meant for a child's ears. Joey seemed to sense the shift in mood. He leaned against Thomas's side in silent comfort, a gesture that caught Thomas by surprise. They were still standing there when Diane emerged from the bedroom, her hair tied back, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "The plows are out," Thomas informed her, offering a fresh cup of coffee. "Does that mean we can leave soon?" Diane asked, accepting the mug gratefully. Thomas shook his head. "Main roads first, then they'll get to us. But there's something else we should probably handle today." "What's that?" "Your car. If we can get it running again, you'll be ready to go once the road's clear." Thomas glanced out the window at the buried vehicle. "I can dig it out and take a look." After breakfast, Thomas bundled up in his heavy work clothes and grabbed a shovel. Diane insisted on helping, leaving the children in the apartment with strict instructions to behave and some paper and colored pencils Thomas had found in a drawer. The morning air was crisp and clean, the kind that only follows a heavy snow. Their breath formed clouds as they worked side by side, clearing a path to the road. Other people in town were doing the same, and occasional waves and greetings were exchanged across snow-piled yards. "So," Thomas said after they'd been working for a while, "you mentioned a fresh start yesterday." Diane paused, leaning on her shovel. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "My husband walked out 8 months ago, left us with a mountain of debt and a lot of bad memories." Thomas nodded, continuing to dig. Sometimes silence was the best response. He wasn't... Diane seemed to search for the right words. "He wasn't a kind man, especially toward the end." Thomas felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had hurt the woman standing before him. A woman who had shown nothing but strength and grace since he'd met her. "Some people don't deserve the families they have," Thomas said finally. "No," Diane agreed quietly. "They don't." She resumed shoveling with renewed vigor. "Anyway, my brother offered us a place to stay until I can get back on my feet. I'm a teacher, but finding a mid-year position isn't easy." "What do you teach?" Thomas asked, grateful for the shift to easier ground. "Third grade," Diane replied, a smile warming her face. 8-year-olds are the best, still excited about learning but old enough to tie their own shoes. They reached the road where Diane's car had slid off, now just a snow-covered bump in the landscape. It took another hour of digging to uncover enough of the vehicle for Thomas to pop the hood and take a look. "Battery's dead for sure," he announced after a quick inspection. "Probably from sitting in this cold. Might be other issues too, but we'll start there." He closed the hood. "I've got a battery jumper back at the shop. Let me grab a few tools too." As they walked back, Diane noticed a few people giving them curious looks. An elderly man shoveling his walkway stopped to stare openly, his eyes moving between Thomas and Diane with undisguised interest. "Don't mind Mr. Parker," Thomas murmured. "Town this size, anything different is big news." "Different?" Diane asked, then understood. "Oh," Thomas shrugged. "Most folks around here are decent enough, just not used to seeing..." He trailed off. "A black man and a white woman together?" Diane finished for him, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Something like that," Thomas acknowledged. "Though I was going to say strangers. We don't get many visitors in winter." Diane's face relaxed into a small smile. "Sorry, I get defensive sometimes." "No need to apologize," Thomas said. "I've lived here all my life, except for my time in the service. People know me, but I'd be lying if I said I haven't noticed the look sometimes." Back at the garage, they checked on the children who had created elaborate drawings of cars and snowmen. Thomas gathered the tools he'd need, including jumper cables and a portable battery pack. "Can we help fix the car?" Lily asked eagerly. "Sure can," Thomas replied. "Every mechanic needs assistance." They made their way back to the car, the children bringing new energy to the task. Thomas showed Joey how to hold the flashlight and taught Lily the names of different tools as he worked. The battery was indeed dead, but the jumper pack brought it back to life. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to steady life. "You did it," Joey cheered, jumping up and down. "We did it," Thomas corrected with a wink. "Couldn't have done it without my expert assistance." A quick inspection revealed no other major issues, though Thomas recommended a full service once they reached Diane's brother's place. "Just to be safe," he advised. "That spin-out might have knocked something loose." By late afternoon, the plows had made their way to the side street where the garage stood. The main road was now passable, though still slippery. "Looks like you folks could probably head out tomorrow morning," Thomas said as they sat around his small kitchen table for an early dinner. He was surprised by the twinge of disappointment he felt at the thought. I guess so, Diane agreed, her expression unreadable. We've imposed on you long enough. It's been no imposition, Thomas assured her. Actually, it's been, he hesitated, nice, having company. After dinner, while the children were engrossed in a board game Thomas had found in his closet, Diane helped him wash dishes. Can I ask you something personal? She said suddenly. Sure, Thomas replied, drying a plate. Have you always been alone? I mean, she flushed slightly. That came out wrong. I meant you seem good with kids, comfortable with family stuff, but you live alone above your garage. Thomas set the plate down carefully. I was married once. Long time ago now, Laura. We were young, high school sweethearts. She wanted to leave this town, see the world. I wanted to stay, take over my dad's garage. He shrugged. Neither of us was wrong, just wanted different things. I'm sorry, Diane said softly. Don't be. We parted as friends. She's in California now, married with 3 kids. Sends me Christmas cards, Thomas smiled. After that, I joined the army for a few years. By the time I came back, Dad was sick. Taking care of him in the garage didn't leave much time for dating. He glanced at her. Life happens the way it happens. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thomas opened it to find Mike from the diner, holding a large paper bag. Brought you folks some dinner from the diner, Mike announced. Figured you might be getting tired of whatever you had on hand. That's real thoughtful, Mike, Thomas said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Mike lowered his voice. Also thought you should know there's talk around town. About your guests. He cast a meaningful glance toward Diane and the children. Thomas stiffened. What kind of talk? Nothing bad from most folks, Mike assured him quickly. Just you know how people are. Curious. But Pete Wilson's been running his mouth at the diner asking why a black man's got a white woman and her kids staying with him. Thomas's jaw tightened. Pete Wilson had never liked him. Dating back to high school rivalries neither had outgrown. I appreciate the heads up, Thomas said quietly, and the food. After Mike left, Thomas distributed the diner food, burgers, fries, and milkshakes, trying to keep his expression neutral. But Diane had caught the exchange. Problem? She asked when the children were distracted by their food. Thomas shook his head. Nothing to worry about. He forced a smile. Small towns, you know. Everyone knows everyone's business. Later, after the children were asleep, Diane found Thomas sitting alone in the darkened garage, staring at an old photo. That's your dad? She guessed, noticing the resemblance. Thomas nodded. And my brother. He passed her the photo of 3 men standing proudly in front of a newly renovated garage. Opening day after we expanded the shop. Diane studied the image. You look like them. Same eyes. Dad always said our eyes gave away everything we were thinking. Thomas took the photo back carefully. He'd have liked you. And the kids, why's that? He believed in helping people. Said that's what community means, being there when needed. Thomas looked up at her, also had a soft spot for kids. Used to fix bikes for free if families couldn't afford repairs. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Diane spoke again. This Pete Wilson that Mike mentioned, is he going to be a problem? Thomas considered his answer. Pete's all talk. Always has been, but, Diane prompted, sensing the unspoken concern. But sometimes talk causes problems of its own, Thomas admitted. Nothing for you to worry about, though. You'll be on your way tomorrow. As they headed back upstairs, neither of them mentioned the strange mix of relief and regret that accompanied the thought of their imminent parting. Neither did they know that Pete Wilson's talk had already set in motion events that would challenge them both in unexpected ways the next day. Thomas woke before dawn to the sound of something hitting the garage door. At first, he thought it might be falling ice from the roof, but then came another thud, too deliberate to be accidental. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake his guests, and moved to the window. In the dim glow of the street lamp, he could make out 3 figures standing in front of his garage. Even from a distance, he recognized Pete Wilson's stocky frame. They were tossing snowballs at the garage door, laughing loudly. Thomas felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. Nothing good would come from confrontation. He watched as they eventually grew bored and wandered off, their laughter fading into the night. He couldn't fall back asleep, so he made coffee and sat in the kitchen, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue. He was still there when Diane found him an hour later. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Couldn't sleep," Thomas replied, deciding not to mention the disturbance. "Roads should be clear enough today. You'll be able to make it to your brother's place." Diane nodded, a hint of something like regret crossing her face. "The kids will miss you." "They haven't stopped talking about Mr. Thomas and his cool tools." Thomas smiled. "I'll miss them too. And their mom," he added, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. The moment was interrupted by Lily and Joey bursting into the kitchen, already full of energy despite the early hour. "Can we have pancakes?" Joey asked, climbing onto a chair. "For our last day?" "Last day?" Lily's face fell. "We're leaving?" Diane smoothed her daughter's hair. "Yes, honey. The roads are clear now. We need to get to Uncle David's place." Lily looked at Thomas with big eyes. "But can we come back to visit?" Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Of course you can, any time." After breakfast, they packed up their few belongings. Thomas helped carry their bags down to the car, which was now fully accessible thanks to the plows that had come through overnight. As Diane was loading the last bag, Thomas noticed something on the driver's side door. "Hold on," he said, stepping closer. Someone had scratched a crude message into the paint. "Go home." Thomas quickly positioned himself to block Diane's view. "Let me check something on the engine before you go," he said, popping the hood to distract her while he thought about what to do. But Diane wasn't easily fooled. "Thomas, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he lied. "Just want to make sure everything's good for your drive." Diane walked around to his side of the car and saw the scratched message. Her face paled, then flushed with anger. "Who would do this?" she demanded. Thomas closed the hood. "Pete Wilson, probably. Or one of his friends," he sighed. "I heard them outside last night but didn't think they'd go this far." Diane looked toward her children, who were thankfully still inside the garage, out of earshot. "Because of me staying with you?" Thomas nodded grimly. "Some people in this town have small minds. Pete's one of them." He ran his hand over the scratches. "I can fix this for you. Have it looking good as new in no time." "We don't have time," Diane said, checking her watch. "David's expecting us by noon." "Then let me cover it up for now," Thomas insisted. "I've got some touch-up paint that should match close enough. Won't take 10 minutes. While he worked, Diane kept the children busy inside, sparing them from seeing the hateful message. Thomas felt a slow burn of anger as he applied the paint. He'd known Pete all his life. They'd gone to the same schools, played on the same baseball team as teenagers. Yet Pete had never seen past the color of his skin. By the time the children came out, the message was covered with a slightly mismatched layer of paint, noticeable if you looked closely but not obvious. "All set," Thomas said with forced cheerfulness. "Just a little touch-up." Joey didn't seem to notice anything wrong, but Lily was more perceptive. She looked between the adults, sensing the tension. "Is the car broken again?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," Diane assured her. "Mr. Thomas just wanted to make sure everything was perfect for our trip." As they prepared for final goodbyes, Thomas's phone rang. It was Mike from the diner. "Thomas, you might want to keep an eye out," Mike warned without preamble. "Pete and his buddies were in here earlier, drunk from last night and still running their mouths. Talking about teaching you a lesson about, well, you know." "Thanks for the heads up," Thomas said, keeping his voice casual while glancing at Diane and the kids. They already left their mark on her car. Mike cursed under his breath. "Want me to call Sheriff Taylor?" "Not yet," Thomas decided. "Don't want to make a bigger scene before they leave town." After hanging up, Thomas helped Diane get the children settled in the car. Joey gave him a high five while Lily insisted on a hug. "Remember what I taught you about cars?" Thomas asked her. "Always check the oil and listen to the engine," she recited proudly. "That's right," Thomas said with a grin. "You'll make a fine mechanic someday." When the children were buckled in, Thomas walked Diane to the driver's side. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "It was nothing," Thomas replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Diane said firmly. "Not anyone." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper. "My brother's address and phone number, and my cell, in case you ever want to check how the car's running." Thomas accepted the paper with a nod, knowing it was more than just contact information being offered. As Diane started the engine, they heard the roar of another vehicle approaching fast. A pickup truck skidded around the corner, Pete Wilson at the wheel with two of his friends in the bed. "There he is," one of them shouted, pointing at Thomas. Thomas stepped in front of Diane's car protectively. "Get going," he urged her. Now, but Diane didn't move. Instead, she turned off the engine and got out of the car. "What's happening?" she demanded. Pete's truck screeched to a halt in front of the garage. He jumped out, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Thought you'd be gone by now," he sneered at Diane. "We were just leaving," Thomas said evenly, placing himself between Pete and Diane. "No need for trouble, Pete." "Already trouble," Pete spat. "When you start bringing in outsiders, letting them stay with you like that." He gestured crudely. "What will people think about our town?" Thomas kept his voice calm. "They'll think we help people in need. That's what decent folks do." One of Pete's friends jumped down from the truck. "Come on, Pete, let's just go." But Pete was too far gone, fueled by alcohol and old prejudices. "You always thought you were better than everyone else, didn't you, Thomas? With your fancy garage and your army stories." "I never said that," Thomas replied. "Now I'm asking you to leave. These people have done nothing to you." Pete took a step forward, his fists clenching. "Maybe I don't want to leave." The tension was broken by the sudden wail of a police siren. Sheriff Taylor's cruiser pulled up behind Pete's truck, lights flashing. "Everything okay here?" the sheriff asked, stepping out with one hand resting casually on his holster. "Just saying goodbye to some friends." "Sheriff," Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Pete. Sheriff Taylor looked between them, taking in the situation. "Pete Wilson, you wouldn't be causing trouble on my streets, would you? Especially after I let you off with just a warning for that bar fight last month." Pete's shoulders slumped slightly. "No trouble, Sheriff. Just passing by." "Then I suggest you pass on by somewhere else," the sheriff said pointedly. "Now." With a final glare at Thomas, Pete climbed back into his truck. As they drove away, he shouted something out the window that the children thankfully couldn't hear over the truck's engine. The sheriff turned to Thomas and Diane. "Mike called me," he explained. "Thought I might need to check things out." He tipped his hat to Diane. "Ma'am, heard you had some car trouble during the storm." "Yes," Diane confirmed, visibly shaken. "Thomas has been very helpful." "He's good that way," Sheriff Taylor agreed. "One of our finest citizens." He gave Thomas a meaningful look. "Want me to follow them out of town? Make sure they get where they're going?" Diane looked at her children, who were watching wide-eyed from the car. "I'd appreciate that, Sheriff." After the sheriff returned to his cruiser, Diane turned to Thomas. "Does this happen often?" Thomas shook his head. "Pete's bark is worse than his bite, and most folks around here aren't like him. Still," Diane said, "I'm sorry we brought this trouble to your door." "You didn't bring anything," Thomas insisted. "Pete's problems were here long before you arrived." He managed to smile. "And meeting you and the kids was worth a little trouble." Their goodbye was briefer than planned, with the sheriff waiting to escort them. As Diane's car pulled away, with Lily and Joey waving frantically from the back seat, Thomas felt a strange emptiness settle over him. 3 days ago, these people had been strangers. Now somehow they felt like family. He watched until their car disappeared around the corner, then went inside to face the sudden silence of his apartment. On the table sat Lily's drawing of their snow family, stick, figures holding hands in front of a garage with "Thank you, Mr. Thomas" written in wobbly letters across the top. Thomas carefully pinned it to his refrigerator, smoothing the wrinkles with his hand. As he did, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. On the back was Diane's name and her brother's address, along with a simple message: "When you're ready for company." Thomas smiled to himself. Maybe this wasn't goodbye after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of something unexpected, something neither of them could have imagined when a car slid off the road during a blizzard just 3 days ago. 2 weeks passed, after Diane and her children left. Thomas fell back into his routine, opening the garage at 7, working until 6, then spending quiet evenings in his apartment. But something had changed. The silence that had once felt comfortable now seemed empty. Lily's drawing remained on his refrigerator, a colorful reminder of laughter and snowball fights. Sometimes during slow afternoons, he found himself wondering how they were doing at Diane's brother's place. Had Joey made new friends? Was Lily still talking about becoming a mechanic? He'd picked up his phone several times to call the number Diane had left, but always put it down again. What would he say? "I miss you"? That seemed too forward, too presumptuous. After all, They'd only known each other for 3 days. The incident with Pete Wilson had unexpected consequences. Word had spread through town about how Thomas had sheltered the stranded family, and how Pete had harassed them. The story grew with each telling, until Thomas found himself receiving nods of approval from people who had barely acknowledged him before. Old Mrs. Peterson stopped by with a casserole. "For being a good neighbor," she explained. Mike from the diner refused payment for Thomas's coffee 3 days in a row. "On the house for the town hero," he insisted despite Thomas's protests. Even Sheriff Taylor made a point of dropping by the garage. "Pete Wilson's keeping his distance," he reported. "I had a talk with him about what happens to folks who can't behave themselves in my town." Thomas appreciated the support, but felt uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't a hero. He'd just done what anyone should do when someone needs help. One afternoon, as Thomas was finishing up an oil change, an unfamiliar car pulled into the garage. A tall man in his 40s stepped out, looking around with interest. "You Thomas Bell?" the man asked. Thomas nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's me. Can I help you with something?" The man extended his hand. "David Richards. I believe you met my sister and her kids a couple weeks back." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "Diane's brother?" "The same." David shook Thomas's hand firmly. "Thought I should come by and thank you personally for helping them out during the storm." Thomas invited David into the office, offering him coffee. "How are they settling in?" Good, David assured him. "Kids are enrolled in school. Diane's got some promising job interviews lined up." He took a sip of coffee. "But I've got to be honest. Those kids won't stop talking about you. Joey tells everyone his friend Thomas taught him how to fix cars." Thomas couldn't help but smile. "Smart kid. Quick learner." David studied Thomas for a moment. "Diane told me about the trouble with that Pete fella." He shook his head. "Some people never change, do they?" "Most do eventually," Thomas replied. "Pete's just stuck in the past." David nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Millfield's not that far from here. About an hour's drive." He set his cup down. "We're having a little housewarming thing this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just family and a few neighbors. Diane would probably appreciate a familiar face." Thomas hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude on family time." "Not intruding if you're invited," David countered. "Besides, I owe you a proper thank you for taking care of my sister and the kids." He scribbled an address on a business card. 3 o'clock. "No pressure, but the door's open if you want to come by." After David left, Thomas stared at the card for a long time. The thought of seeing Diane and the children again made him feel unexpectedly nervous, like a teenager before a first date. Saturday morning, Thomas woke early. He spent longer than usual choosing what to wear, finally settling on a clean pair of jeans and a button-down shirt he usually saved for special occasions. He debated bringing a gift, eventually deciding on a small toolbox he'd assembled for the children. Kid-sized tools that were real enough to work but safe enough for small hands. The drive to Millfield was pleasant, the roads clear under a bright blue sky. As he approached David's address, a modest 2-story house with a large yard, Thomas almost turned back twice. What if Diane thought he was overstepping? What if the children had already forgotten him? He sat in his truck for 5 minutes before gathering the courage to approach the door, gift in hand. Before he could knock, the door flew open. Lily stood there, her eyes widening in shock and delight. "Mr. Thomas," she screamed, launching herself at him with such force that he nearly dropped the toolbox. "Mom, Joey." "Mr. Thomas is here." Suddenly, Thomas found himself surrounded. Joey appeared from nowhere, talking a mile a minute about his new school. Diane emerged from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face brightening with surprise and something else Thomas couldn't quite name. "You came," she said simply, her voice soft amid the children's excited chatter. "Hope that's okay," Thomas replied, suddenly unsure. "Your brother invited me." "It's more than okay," Diane assured him. "We've missed you." David appeared, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "About time you showed up. These kids have been asking about you every day." The afternoon passed in a blur of introductions, food, and laughter. David's neighbors were friendly, curious about Thomas but welcoming. The children proudly showed him around their new home, arguing over who would give which tour. Later, as the party moved to the backyard, Thomas found himself sitting next to Diane on the porch steps, watching Joey and Lily play tag with the neighbor children. They've adjusted well, Thomas observed. Diane nodded. Kids are resilient. More than adults sometimes. She glanced at him. How about you? How's the garage? Same as always, Thomas replied. Though Mrs. Peterson stops by more often now. I think she's decided I need feeding up. Diane laughed, the sound warming Thomas more than the afternoon sun. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. I almost called you a dozen times, Diane admitted suddenly. But I wasn't sure if what happened was just because we were thrown together by the storm. Thomas considered his words carefully. I think the storm just sped things up. Showed us who we really are without all the usual getting-to-know-you stuff in the way. Diane's hand found his on the step between them. I've been thinking about that a lot. About how sometimes life sends us exactly what we need, even if it doesn't look that way at first. Like a blizzard, Thomas suggested with a small smile. Like a blizzard, Diane agreed. And a kind man who didn't think twice about helping strangers. The conversation was interrupted by Joey running up with a scraped knee, which Thomas helped bandage with supplies from the bathroom first aid kit. As he carefully placed the adhesive bandage, Joey looked up at him solemnly. Are you going to visit us again? He asked. Or was this just a one-time thing? The question, so direct in the way only children can be, caught Thomas off guard. He glanced at Diane, who was watching them both, waiting for his answer as much as Joey was. Well, that depends, Thomas said carefully. But you want me to visit again? Yes, Joey exclaimed without hesitation. You could teach me more about cars, and maybe fix my bike. The chain keeps falling off, Thomas laughed. Sounds like a job for a good mechanic. You're the best mechanic, Joey declared with absolute certainty. By early evening, most of the guests had left. Thomas helped David clean up while Diane put the children to bed. They'd insisted that Thomas read their bedtime story, a request he'd fulfilled with surprising ease, as if he'd been doing it for years. You're good with them, David commented as they stacked chairs in the garage. They don't warm up to just anybody like that. They're great kids, Thomas replied. David gave him a knowing look. My sister's pretty great too. Yes, Thomas agreed simply. She is. When Diane came back downstairs, she found Thomas waiting by the door, car keys in hand. I should get going, he said. It's a bit of a drive back. Diane nodded, but neither of them moved toward the door. Thank you for coming, she said finally. It meant a lot to the kids. To all of us, I was thinking. Thomas began, then paused, gathering his courage. There's a fair coming to Pinewood next weekend. Old-fashioned country fair with rides and games. The kids might enjoy it. They would, Diane agreed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And their mother might enjoy it too. Thomas felt a weight lift from his chest. So maybe I could pick you all up? Make a day of it? I'd like that, Diane said softly. We'd all like that very much. As Thomas drove home that night, the road didn't seem as long or as lonely as it had on the way there. His mind was filled with plans, places to take the children, things they might enjoy seeing. And beneath it all, the warm certainty that whatever was growing between him and Diane was real, not just the product of 3 snowbound days. 6 months later, Thomas added a second mailbox next to his above the garage. The apartment that had once felt too quiet now echoed with the sounds of children's laughter and family dinners. Lily had her own small workbench in the corner of the garage, where Thomas was teaching her the basics of mechanics. Joey had started kindergarten in Pinewood, already making friends and settling in as if he'd always lived there. The town had adjusted to its newest residents with minimal fuss. Even Pete Wilson had grudgingly nodded to Thomas at the gas station last week. Not quite an apology, but perhaps the beginning of a change. One evening, as Thomas and Diane sat on the small balcony watching the sunset, Diane reached for his hand. You know what I was thinking? She asked. What's that? That sometimes the worst storms bring the most unexpected blessings, she said, resting her head against his shoulder. Thomas thought about the night a blizzard had brought a stranded family to his door. How he'd thought he was rescuing them, never imagining they were actually rescuing him from a lifetime of solitude. I never believed in fate, he admitted. Always thought we make our own way in life. And now? Diane asked. Thomas looked through the window to where Lily and Joey were setting the table for dinner, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to use the special rocket ship cup. Now, he said, squeezing Diane's hand, I'm thinking maybe we get a little help sometimes. From blizzards, and broken-down cars, and strangers who don't stay strangers for long. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Inside, Joey was calling them to dinner, his voice filled with the impatience of hunger and the confidence of knowing he was heard, knowing he was home. Thomas and Diane stood together hand in hand, ready to join their family, the family none of them had been looking for but all of them had somehow found.